Listen. Do you hear that? Tonight, we're going to talk about the things that hide in the silence, the secrets that fester behind drywall and smiles. This story will take you to a quiet home in California, where on August 12, 1985, the veil between worlds began to tear for the Donovan family. We will walk with Janet as she fights an unseen war, feel Jack's doubt curdle into terror, and listen for the whispers that tormented their daughters, Sarah and Emily. We'll uncover what happens when the thing that's come to destroy you is not what or who you think it is. Before we unlock the front door to their nightmare, I invite you to join our little circle of watchers. Press that subscribe button. Let the bells chime be a small ward against the dark. And give this video a like. Think of it as leaving a small offering, a little bit of light to hold back the shadows we're about to invite in. Now, be still. The story is beginning.
Welcome to Mr. Grave Horror Channel.
The house on Chase Street was a portrait of modest American hope, a simple two-story duplex in a sleepy corner of Northern California. It was the first place Jack and Janet Donovan could truly call their own. It was August of 1985, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked asphalt and cut grass. For Jack, a stoic mechanic whose hands were perpetually stained with grease, the house was a foundation. For Janet, a woman whose warmth could fill any room, it was a canvas for their family's future. Their two daughters, 10-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Emily, saw it as a kingdom, their laughter echoing off the freshly painted and tragically thin walls. The first week was a blur of unpacking boxes and dreaming. They argued playfully over where the worn floral sofa should go, and celebrated their first night with pizza eaten on the living room floor. It was perfect. And then the small things started. It began with a smell, a faint, sickly sweet odor like rotting meat left in the sun that would appear for a moment in the upstairs hallway and vanish just as quickly. Janet would pause, her nose wrinkling, only for Jack to walk into the same spot a second later and smell nothing but lemon-scented cleaner. "Probably the old pipes, Jan," he'd say, his voice a comforting rumble of logic. "This place isn't brand new." Then came the sounds. Not the familiar groans of a house settling, but something more deliberate. A faint, rhythmic scratching from inside the wall of the master bedroom. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. It always came after midnight, a sound like a trapped animal, frantic and weak. Jack, ever the pragmatist, blamed squirrels. He spent a whole Saturday on a ladder, checking the siding and the roof line, finding nothing. The scratching continued, indifferent to his efforts. The real unease, the kind that plants a cold seed of dread in your gut, started on a Tuesday night a month after they moved in. Janet was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she washed the last of the dinner dishes. Emily was coloring at the table, her crayons scattered like confetti. Janet reached for the dish soap, her hand closing on empty air. She frowned. She had just used it. She scanned the counter, then the sink. It was gone. "Em, honey, did you move Mummy's soap?" Emily looked up, her blue eyes wide and innocent. "No, Mummy." Janet sighed, wiping her wet hands on her jeans. She checked the floor behind the trash can. Nothing. Giving up, she turned back to the sink and a gasp caught in her throat. The bottle of soap was sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the dining table, a place she had just scanned seconds before. Emily hadn't moved. She stared at it, her heart starting a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. The logical part of her brain scrambled for an explanation, but the primal part, the part that remembers the dark, whispered a single chilling word: wrong. The incidents grew, weaving themselves into the fabric of their daily lives like a dark thread. The television would snap on in the middle of the night, blasting static into the silent house. They'd unplug it only to find it plugged back in the next morning. Jack's carefully organized tools would be scattered across the garage floor. A dark, human-shaped stain appeared on the basement floor, and no amount of scrubbing could lighten it. Jack held on to his skepticism like a shield. For every strange event, he had an explanation. Faulty wiring, drafts, forgetfulness. But his armor was beginning to crack. The change came the day he saw it himself. He was walking down the upstairs hall when a flicker of movement in his periphery caught his eye. He turned. For a split second, he saw it. A shifting, amorphous black mass darker than any shadow, hovering near the ceiling in the corner. It was shapeless yet substantial, and it seemed to suck the very light out of the air around it. He blinked, and it was gone. He stood frozen, the hairs on his arms erect. It wasn't a trick of the light. He had felt it, a wave of absolute coldness and a palpable malevolence that seemed to press in on him. He didn't tell Janet. He couldn't bring himself to give her fear a name. But the presence, whatever it was, no longer seemed content with subtlety. It turned its attention to the children. Sarah, their eldest, was the first to bear the brunt of it. She started complaining of whispers in her room after the lights went out. "What are they saying, honey?" Janet asked one night, tucking the blankets tightly around her daughter's trembling frame. "I don't know," she whispered back, her eyes darting towards the darkest corner of her room. "It sounds like a mean old man, but the words are all mixed up. It just feels angry." One afternoon, Janet walked into the girls' room to find every single one of Emily's dolls and stuffed animals arranged in a perfect, silent circle in the middle of the floor, all facing the closet door. Emily was huddled in the hallway crying. She swore she hadn't done it. The breaking point for Jack's disbelief came on a chilly October evening. The family was watching a movie in the living room, a rare moment of peace. Suddenly, an earth-shattering bang erupted from the kitchen, as if a car had crashed through the wall. Jack shot to his feet, his heart pounding. He ran into the kitchen, expecting to find devastation. The room was pristine, untouched. Every pot and pan was in its place. Nothing had fallen. He stood there, bewildered, when another sound reached him. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound of pure hatred, ancient and predatory. And then, from the living room, Janet screamed. He sprinted back to find her pressed against the far wall, her face a mask of stark terror. Sarah and Emily were crying, clutching at her legs. "John, what happened? What is it?" The chair," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the large, heavy armchair he'd been sitting in moments before. It had lifted several inches off the floor, hovered for a terrifying moment, and then slammed back down with incredible force. Denial was no longer an option. They were not alone in the house. The activity escalated into a full-blown assault. The scratchings in the walls became a furious clawing, sometimes accompanied by 3 distinct, mocking knocks, an unholy trinity. The foul stench was now a constant presence in the upstairs rooms. One night Janet woke up screaming, levitating 2 feet above the bed. She hung there for what felt like an eternity, held by an invisible force before being violently thrown against the wall, leaving a deep indentation in the drywall. Jack could only watch, paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like his heart had turned to ice. Scratches appeared on their bodies as they slept, long, angry red welts in parallel lines of 3. But the most violating, most soul-shattering attacks were the ones that came in the deepest dark. Unseen hands would grope and molest Janet in her bed, a cold, violating presence that left her feeling defiled and broken. Jack, too, experienced it, a different presence, cloying and suffocating, that would press down on him, whispering obscenities in a layered, feminine voice. They were being tormented physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Their home transformed into a personalized hell. Broken and desperate, they turned to the only place they could think of, the church. Father Michael, their local priest, was a kind but skeptical man. He blessed the house, sprinkling holy water in every room and reciting prayers. For 2 days there was an unnerving silence. The Donovans breathed a collective sigh of relief, daring to hope. The hope was a cruel joke. On the 3rd night, the entity returned with a vengeance. Every cabinet and drawer in the house was ripped open and their contents hurled across the rooms. A crucifix Janet had hung on the wall was torn down, bent into a grotesque shape, and thrown at her. The whispers in Sarah's room became a clear, terrifying voice. "Get out! You are mine!" It rasped, a sound like grinding stones. Father Michael, shaken, admitted he was out of his depth. He gave them a number for a husband and wife team of paranormal investigators he'd heard of, renowned for dealing with so-called inhuman cases. David and Eliza Thorne were their last resort. The Thornes arrived a week later. David was a quiet, observant man with eyes that seemed to see more than most. Eliza was warm but no nonsense, her presence immediately calming. They walked through the house, their equipment, EMF meters, audio recorders, registering anomalies that made even Jack's hair stand on end. After hours of investigation, they sat the Donovans down at their tormented dining table. "There is something here," David said, grave. "It is powerful, and it is not human. It's a demonic entity drawn to this house for reasons we don't yet understand. It's feeding on your fear. The blessing, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. It only made it angrier." Eliza placed a comforting hand on Janet's arm. "We can help you, but you have to be strong. We need to find its anchor. What gives it the right to be here?" Over the next few weeks, the Thorns conducted multiple cleansing rituals. Each attempt was met with violent resistance. The house would shake, objects would fly, and horrifying voices would scream from the walls. During one session, as David read from the rite of exorcism, the basement door flew off its hinges and shot up the stairs, narrowly missing his head. The entity was strong, and it was winning. The investigators decided on a different approach. They believed the entity might have an attachment to a person, not just the place. Eliza, who was also a trained hypnotist, suggested a deep regression session with Janet to see if some forgotten trauma or event had opened a door. They gathered in the living room, the air thick with tension. Janet lay on the sofa, her eyes closed as Elijah's calm voice guided her deeper and deeper into her subconscious. She guided her back through the haunting, through the move, through her life with Jack. Nothing. "Let's try Jack," she suggested quietly. "Maybe it's something in his history." Jack was hesitant, but desperate enough to agree. He lay down, his big, calloused hands clenched into fists. Eliza began the process, her voice a soothing mantra. She took him back, past his marriage, past his time as a mechanic, back to his late teenage years. "Where are you, Jack?" Eliza asked softly. His voice, when it came, was different, younger, frightened. "In the woods, with Mark and Chris." "What are you doing in the woods, Jack?" A long silence. Jack's body tensed on the sofa. "The book. We found it in that old shop. It had symbols. We were just messing around. We wanted to feel something, some power." Janet's blood ran cold. She had never heard this before. "What kind of power, Jack?" Eliza pressed gently. "What did you do?" His breathing became ragged. "We drew the circle, said the words. It was stupid, a joke." He started to tremble. "Nothing happened. We laughed about it. We left." "Are you sure nothing happened, Jack?" David leaned in, his voice low and intense. "Think. After you left the circle, the very last moment." Jack let out a choked sob. A memory walled off and buried for 20 years was breaking free. The air, it went cold, so cold, and there was a pressure, like the whole world was pushing down. Mark and Chris ran. I couldn't move. I fell inside the circle." Eliza's eyes met David's. They both knew. "What happened when you fell, Jack?" His face was a canvas of pure horror. His eyes squeezed shut, as if trying to block out a sight only he could see. His voice dropped to a terrified, choked whisper. "It wasn't a joke. It answered." He began to thrash on the sofa. "No! No, get off! Get away!" His own voice was gone now, replaced by something else. A guttural, ancient sound that clawed its way out of his throat. It was the same growl he'd heard in the kitchen. And then it spoke, not through his mouth, but seemingly from the air around him, a chorus of layered demonic voices. "This one is ours. He opened the door." Janet screamed, scrambling back from the sofa. The horrifying truth slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The scratching in the walls, the foul stench, the black mass, the violence, the whispers. It wasn't the house. It had never been the house. It was Jack. He hadn't just summoned something that day in the woods. He had become a gateway. The entity had tethered itself to him, suppressing the memory and lying dormant, feeding on small moments of negativity until the concentrated fear and life energy of a family gave it the power to fully manifest. They hadn't moved into a haunted house. The haunting had moved in with them. Eliza brought a shell-shocked Jack out of the trance. He remembered everything. The ritual, the cold, the feeling of something immense and ancient pouring into him. He sat up, his face ashen, and looked at his wife, his children. He was the monster. The Thorns left that night, their faces grim. An exorcism of a house was one thing. An exorcism of a person who was not possessed but was in fact a living conduit was infinitely more dangerous and complex. It could kill him, or it could fail, unleashing the entity completely. There was no solution, no escape. Selling the house would do nothing. The thing that was tearing their family apart, that had violated and terrorized his wife and children, was looking at them through their father's own loving eyes. The story ends here, but it doesn't truly end. It continues every night in that house on Chase Street. It continues in the silence between Jamit and Jack, a silence now filled with an impossible, unbearable truth. It continues when Sarah and Emily look at their father and feel a flicker of fear they don't understand. The final terrifying scene is not of a demon, but of a woman. It is Janet, weeks later, standing in the doorway of her bedroom long after midnight. Jack is asleep, his face peaceful in the moonlight. He looks like the man she fell in love with, the man who fixed their daughter's bicycles and held her when she cried. But then she hears it, faint but clear. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. It's coming from inside the walls again, but she knows better now. The sound isn't in the walls, it's coming from him. A sound from deep within the man she loves. The sound of something trapped, wanting to get out, or perhaps wanting to invite more things in. She closes her eyes, and a single tear traces a path down her cheek. The true horror wasn't the haunting. It was the love she still felt for the haunted. And now the silence is yours to fill. The secrets we carry, are they ever truly buried? What would you do if the source of your greatest fear was also the source of your greatest love? Look around your own quiet home. Listen closely. Who did you let in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, if you dare.